Hey, flashing lights, honking horns when driving happens all the time, meant to communicate. But what happens if the flashing of the lights, as an example, is considered to be illegal? Takes us to this week's case. Involves a real man. His name was Elli. He lived in the state of Missouri in a town, of all things, named Ellisville. And he was driving along one day and he saw a speed trap. And he went through the speed trap, and then as he was approaching another vehicle, he flashed his lights. The other vehicle driver recognized that meant there was a speed trap up ahead. Slowed down. Well, suddenly, Mr. Elli finds a state officer in a car behind him with flashing lights. Pulls him over. And he is arrested for violation of a local ordinance. And the local ordinance provided that it was illegal to flash lights to warn an approaching motorist of a speed trap. Well, Mr. Elli was then prosecuted for that and fined $1,000. He, of course, was not happy. Interestingly enough, to his defense came the American Civil Liberties Organization. And the American Civil Liberties Group said this is a violation of free speech because it is just another form of speech. And therefore, it is a violation of the First Amendment. Okay, but on the other side, the people who were prosecuting this said, you know what? It's the law. It was an ordinance that was passed in this town. It exists, and the law needs to be enforced, and they went forward on it. Well, this case eventually found its way to a federal district court judge. And there the judge had to consider the case. Had to consider whether it was simply an enforcement of law, as was argued by the prosecuting attorney, or whether it was a violation of the First Amendment protection of free speech. He said, you know what? I have to take a look at this and realize the fact that when you're flashing lights on an automobile to communicate with an oncoming driver, that's no different than rolling down the window and yelling out the window saying, "Speed trap ahead, speed trap ahead." That speech, yelling "speed trap ahead," would be protected under the First Amendment. Flashing your lights, if it's an understood signal that there is a speed trap ahead, is the same thing. Therefore, because it is a form of speech, I find that the ordinance that made it illegal is unconstitutional. And accordingly, fining Mr. Elli $1,000 was unconstitutional. Okay, so what do we learn from this case? We learn from this case what we've learned from a number of other cases, and that is that sometimes a city, a state, can be overly zealous, the U.S. Congress can be overly zealous and pass a law which violates your civil liberties. And when that happens, those civil liberties that are protected by the U.S. Constitution are foremost, and they trump the statute which was overly zealous, overly broad. And the courts, as we've often pointed out, act as that intermediary between you and the legislative arm of government and provide that you, with the civil liberties that are enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, are protected from either states or cities that just get a little carried away with respect to laws that infringe upon your rights. Okay, we bring you this case as we bring you cases every week so you understand how the law works. I'm David Allen.